Welcome back to our continued coverage of the penultimate round of the Inland Off-Road Championship, the Mariendal 250 in brand new terrain. Now with Ural Trucks as one of our key sponsors, it's always nice to have the guys out there to test the water, as we like to say, and check how deep it's actually going to be running every now and again. Ural Trucks actually do come in handy, dragging a few guys out the mud holes and pits that do catch out the crews. For now, all these crews were just going to go into the lineup. They'd already decided their starting order, and it was nervous times. So much work had to be done in the DSP for the service crews to make sure everyone was going to be on point, and the crews that didn't have to do any work certainly had the lower heart rates. For them, it was about simply getting into the lineup, making sure alles was moi, and good to go. Remember, this being the penultimate round of the Inland Off-Road Championship Racing Series, very few of the championships had actually been decided, and everyone was on the countdown, making sure they were good to go. For the first time in the history of the Inland Off-Road Championship, though, it was going to be 3 side-by-sides that would open up our racing account. But as the terrain got a little bit gnarlier and a little bit deeper, they would no doubt start getting caught by a couple of the more higher powered vehicles that qualified a little bit lower down. For now though, they were safe as houses, but the big monsters for production vehicle across all the categories, as well as the open wheelers, were going to be munching up the kilometers and trying desperately to get onto the back wheel of the side-by-sides. They did not want side-by-sides to lock out the podium here, because that would be making history. We've already seen a side-by-side in the Class Gs take the overall win, but we've never yet seen the Class Gs go 1, 2 and 3 for a podium lockout. Further down the startup queue, you could see how close the times were, and with a short 50-kilometer prologue, times were always going to be extremely tight, and dust was going to be a factor in the early kilometers. We were on the long promise to see the rain clouds coming in, because dark clouds were looming on the horizon, and it was gonna definitely get wet come the afternoon. For now though, the dust was flying. None more so than off the back wheel of Peterson. The stories for the guys going out a little bit later on in the fields were either bigger gaps with no dust, or going straight into the dust coming off the tires of the guys that simply out-qualified you on the run. The Isuzu had got himself back into the mix, but it was looking like they hadn't fixed their problems and were going to be running the entire race on rear-wheel drive. That was going to be an ask, maybe not in the early session, but when the rain came, to try and find traction, you would need all 4 wheels spinning, not just the ones at the back. The buggies and the open wheels coming out of the special vehicle classes were mindful of this big time. Not just the fact that they could only get power down on the back wheels, but also when the rain comes down, they don't have hardly any protection inside the cab. And with the race still in its infancy, unfortunately there were 2 early retirements. A crash in the dust between Yanni Visser and Tony Gavea, putting both cars out of the race with massive damage to the front of the Toyota, and on the other hand, massive damage to the back of the buggy of the Gaveas. The weather was coming, and the promise was pretty much a 100% guarantee it was going to get moist from here on out. It wasn't a B for Jacques Leroux and Suisse Moret. A broken coil spring shortly into the race put them out of the running. The Cinderella story for them, unfortunately, was over once again. With the broken steering bit repaired in their trusty old Toyota Hilux, Lawrence and Peter were confident of a good showing come the main race. They set off at a great rate of knots and soon made up a few places as well. The wet and tricky as well as muddy conditions on the second loop played right into their driving style and their hands, with the experienced Lawrence reveling in these conditions. Not even a flat wheel which needed changing could dampen their spirits. That was until a link on the Hilux's suspension broke, and they were well and truly at that point out of the race. And with that, all hope of defending the number 1 plate has gone. There is no way they will take the championship once again in 2020, having had such a good run of things in 2019. They would wear the D1 for one last time into the doubleheader at Camille, but after that, it would be removed from the Haviland Toyota. Showing good pace early on, Solomon and Ahmed Hussein were giving it their all to try and chase down Siafi and Arthur for the Class B win. Unfortunately, their roof broke off, and unbeknownst to them, it damaged a radiator pipe on its journey, subsequently causing overheating and blowing the engine. And that was them out as well. They joined the sidelines of early retirees. When talking about the D20 crew, if only Besson can add reliability to his speed, he will certainly be a force to be reckoned with. At this stage though, a broken front side shaft brought them to a halt, and when they saw that the front diff lost all of its oil as well, they decided to withdraw before any more damage could be caused. They too dropped out of this one. As we say, the speed is there, but you've got to see the flag to rack up those championship points. Their time will come though. The trailer ride home for the Van Jaarsvelds. The A69 is not quite yet a fully formed race vehicle. They'll prep it and get ready for the doubleheader and also the 2021 season. Another unhappy return, this time for Werner Kennedy and Jaco Delport. At times, they made good pace, but they eventually had to withdraw due to too many mechanical issues adding themselves up. Who knows, we may see them once again racing in the future, and they definitely have the speed for top honours. When you check out the E16, what an eventful race for Wayne Smith and Hendrik Ruert in the speedy fitment Freiburg E16 Toyota Hilux. On the start line of the race, Wayne said that all they wanted to do was finish the race to claim as many points as they could towards the championship. Little did they know how challenging their day would become. Two-wheel drive is not ideal for a bucky, and they got stuck 3 times in the muddy sections of the loop. Further issues with their cooling fan and lack of brakes meant they were fighting against the clock to make cut-off before the end of the afternoon. Crossing the line eventually as last finishes didn't matter. What was important was the valuable 3rd place they gained in Class E. This story alone proves what off-road racing is all about. Make it to the finish and you will be rewarded. For Sean Kruger and Johan Becker, it was a tale of 2 halves out here at Mariendal for the 250 event. Their first loop was hot, dry, dusty, and the second loop was cold, wet, muddy, slippery, and tough. Having no windscreen, as you can imagine on these special vehicles, was a real challenge, and they slipped and slid their way to a finish, albeit wet and cold, shivering in their cockpit. We've not seen such elation in a while though, with these smiles lasting long into the night, a testament of how much more can come from this team. There's nothing better than seeing guys so happy and so jolly to come racing, no matter what the situation or the terrain that gets thrown at them. And when the rain comes down in areas like this in the Free State, it is just an absolute joy. Everyone knows the farmers are happy, and the racers are even happier because they get to throw it sideways. Setting off with only rear-wheel drive, Benerick and brother Pierce were hoping for the threatening clouds to stay away and not rain, as the bucky would battle in muddy conditions with only 2-wheel drive. Halfway through the first loop, to add insult to injury, they lost their brakes as well. They decided to push on regardless and found the going very tricky, but reached the DSP at the end of the first loop nonetheless. The brake problem was found and an emergency repair was effected. Now with brakes, they set off on loop number 2, only to encounter the heavy rains 30 kilometers into a 108 kilometer racing loop. 2-wheel drive proved very difficult, and they spent lots of time sideways and all over the place trying to keep the Isuzu pointing in a straight line, but eventually reached the finish line much to their delight and scored a handy 2nd place in Class E, and that on their debut with the Isuzu, showing guts and gusto do get you a very long way in cross-country racing. They will not be forgetting the Mariendal 250 anytime soon. classy drive, and certainly didn't let the home team down. Not 1 kilometer. That was an impressive drive for the E12 crew.
Well done.
Daar is nog een achter je hoor. Daar is nog iemand achter je.
As was the story with many other buckies, TG and SW too lost four-wheel drive shortly into their first racing loop. Whilst not too problematic in the dry, the wet conditions on loop number 2 proved more than a handful though. Imagine all that power from a 4-litre V8 being fed only to the rear wheels of a very light back end of a Toyota Hilux whilst plodding through some sloshy mud. It was a situation of slipping and sliding all over the place and simply trying to just keep moving forwards, hopefully pointing in the right direction as well. Finally, making it to the finish line in these tough conditions, second place in Class F put smiles on the faces of the driver and the navigator, but perhaps not their service crew, who would have to do a big rebuild and a massive clean-up job on the car come Mondays, back at the workshop. Oki and Jandre Kruger spend loads of time preparing their bucky for each race, and it certainly shows. The older but very trusty Hilux never missed a beat. It was nice to end a race with the only thing to report being the fact that the windscreen misted up on the second loop due to the cold conditions when the heavens opened and the heavy rains came down. First place in Class F for the qualifying, followed by a classy first place in class come the finish line as well, made for yet another satisfying and successful family outing and more silverware for the trophy cabinet. And stories around the Braai come the next weekend free. Conditions were absolutely torrid on loop number 2 for all involved. Spare a thought for the camera crew as well. In the B2, Sifi and Arthur Croshaw followed on their good run in the qualifying prologue with no further problems to be reported. Come the main race, they simply stayed out of trouble. The only difficulty they encountered was the tough going on the second loop when the heavens opened. Two-wheel drive is always difficult in muddy conditions, but more so in these open space frames with no windscreens and very little power to work with in the Class Bs. Visibility proved to be their biggest stumbling block, but they too saw the finish line, and with that, a class victory for the Bs. Nervous, tippy-toeing is the only way to describe a way to drive an open-wheel vehicle in these zero traction conditions. The finish line is a happy sight indeed. Setting off in the main race full of hope and very little trepidation was the pairing of Aldi Erasmus and Andre Geldenhuys. Andre, the navigator, is a past Class E drivers champion, but seems to have taken to the role of navigating quite well also. They were going along well when a broken CV joint on one of the rear wheels halted their progress. They lost nearly 40 minutes transplanting a front CV and drive shaft to the rear, and eventually continued on with just two-wheel drive through the rear wheels. This made the going tough in the slippery rain and muddy conditions, and towards the end of the race, they must have absolutely hung on by the skin of their teeth. Class G, fourth place, was not to be sneered at. E5 done and dusted, or perhaps mudded, is a better description. That made it 5 out of 5 for the E5 Hilux of Johan Versa and Jerry Besson. Raking in another Class E win basically secured the Class E championship with one round still to go, and also strengthened their position at the top of the overall championship. They didn't put a foot wrong, nor did they have any issues with the vehicle that simply powered its way around and had a near-perfect race. Johan said that the twisty course really suited the diesel engine of their Toyota, and the results showed it. All eyes now on for the overall in the championship come the double-header final round at Camille for the E5. We continue our coverage after the break to see who took the win at the penultimate round of the series.